please don't die. Sir, please don't die. Someone please help us.
A young nurse saves a dying biker on the street. She loses her job the same day. But 48 hours later, 400 bikers show up at her doorstep and change her life forever. Sarah Cameron was already 17 minutes late when she saw him dying on Walker Street. The massive biker lay sprawled beside his twisted motorcycle, blood pumping from his thigh in rhythmic spurts. Femoral artery, her training screamed at her. 3 minutes to death, maybe 5. People stood around filming on their phones. No one was helping. No one was even trying. She should have kept walking. She was already late, already on thin ice with Dr. Reynolds, who'd been looking for any excuse to fire her. One more infraction and she was done. No job, no way to pay the $120,000 in student loans crushing her, no future. But the oath was louder than fear. Sarah dropped to her knees in the spreading pool of blood. She ripped the sleeve from her uniform, yanked her belt free and wrapped a tourniquet around his massive thigh with shaking hands. Twist, tighten. The bleeding slowed, then stopped. She barked orders at the frozen bystanders, stabilized his head, checked his airway. Her scrubs turned crimson. Her hands wouldn't stop trembling, but he was breathing, still alive. The ambulance arrived. The paramedics took over. And Sarah, drenched in a stranger's blood, picked up her bag and ran the rest of the way to the hospital, straight into the worst day of her life. Dr. Reynolds fired her on the spot, didn't care about the life she'd saved, only cared about the 17 minutes she'd stolen from his precious schedule. She walked out of St. Jude's Hospital with nothing but a plastic bag of her belongings and the crushing weight of knowing she'd sacrificed everything for a man whose name she didn't even know. What Sarah didn't know was that the man she'd saved was Ghost, national treasurer of the Iron Horse Brotherhood, and the Brotherhood never forgot a debt. 48 hours later, the ground began to shake. In a city that never stopped grinding its people into dust, Sarah Cameron was a flicker of light fighting against a storm. At just 26, she lived in a cramped apartment that felt more like a pit stop than a home. The walls were thin enough to hear her neighbors' arguments, the plumbing groaned like something dying, and the single window looked out onto a brick wall so close she could touch it with her fingertips. Every morning and every night, she was either leaving for or coming back from St. Jude's Public Hospital, where she worked double shifts as a licensed practical nurse. The apartment was bare, a second-hand couch with springs that poked through the cushions, a folding table she'd found on the curb, and a mattress on the floor that she covered with her grandmother's quilt, the only thing of value she owned. There were no pictures on the walls, no decorations, nothing that suggested permanence, because this wasn't living, this was surviving. Sarah had no money to spare, only a mountain of student loan debt that seemed taller than any skyscraper around her, $120,000 she could never climb over. The number haunted her dreams, appeared in her nightmares, and sat like a stone in her chest every time she opened her bank account. Her mother, Miss Clara, always told her she had been born with hands meant to heal, hands that carried pain before it broke, and mercy before the world even knew it was needed. Sarah believed that. She had too, but believing didn't make the struggle any easier. Every paycheck disappeared before she could even count it. Rent swallowed the first half. Utilities, groceries, and bus fare took the rest. And then came the student loan payments, those merciless monthly reminders that her education, the very thing that was supposed to lift her up, was now the anchor dragging her down. Every extra shift was swallowed whole by interest rates that bled her dry, compounding faster than she could breathe. She'd done the math once, late at night with tears in her eyes. At this rate, she'd be 70 before the debt was gone. All the while, St. Jude's Hospital demanded more from her, more time, more strength, more sacrifice, until there was almost nothing left. The hospital was a fortress of fluorescent lights and peeling linoleum, where the sick came because they had nowhere else to go. Sarah loved her patients, but the place itself was a machine designed to devour its workers. Understaffed, underfunded, and drowning in bureaucracy, St. Jude's chewed up nurses and spit them out broken. And waiting for her there was Dr. Elias Reynolds, a man who believed policy mattered more than people. He was tall and thin, with wire-rimmed glasses and a mouth that seemed permanently fixed in a sneer. To him, lateness was a crime greater than cruelty, and compassion was weakness. He'd been written up twice for berating nurses in front of patients, but nothing ever stuck. He had tenure, connections, and a mean streak that made everyone walk on eggshells around him. Sarah had been on his radar for months. Too soft, he said. Too emotional, too human. That Thursday morning was already stacked against her. Sarah had set 3 alarms, but the first 2 hadn't gone off, victims of a power flicker sometime in the night. She'd bolted upright at 6:47 a.m., her shift starting at 7:00, and the hospital was a 30-minute bus ride away. She'd thrown on her scrubs, grabbed her coat, and sprinted down 4 flights of stairs because the elevator had been broken for 2 weeks. The bus was late, of course it was. Sarah stood at the stop, bouncing on her heels, checking her phone every 10 seconds as precious minutes ticked away. When it finally arrived, it crawled through traffic like a dying animal. By the time she got off, she was already 12 minutes behind schedule. A stalled bus left her power walking across cracked sidewalks, 10 minutes late and praying Reynolds wouldn't fire her. Her lungs burned, her legs ached. She dodged around pedestrians, her bag bouncing against her hip, her mind racing through excuses that she knew wouldn't matter. Reynolds didn't care about traffic or broken alarms or the fact that she'd worked a 16-hour shift the day before. He only cared about the clock. But halfway down Walker Street, she stopped cold. A motorcycle lay twisted against the curb, its rider sprawled beside it. The bike's front wheel was bent at an unnatural angle, chrome scraped raw, gasoline leaking onto the asphalt in a dark puddle. The rider wasn't moving. He was massive, wrapped in a weather-beaten leather jacket, a beard curled like smoke, his boots scuffed and knuckles raw. But what caught Sarah's eyes wasn't his size or the faded Iron Horse Brotherhood patch on his back. It was the blood pouring from a femoral artery, fast and deadly. She'd seen this before, in training in the ER in her nightmares. A femoral bleed could kill in minutes, 3, maybe 5 if you were lucky, and from the pool spreading beneath him, he was already running out of time. People stood around him in a loose circle, staring. A woman on her phone was crying. A man in a suit was filming. No one was helping. No one was doing anything. Her mother's warning whispered inside her, "Don't get involved with trouble, baby." Miss Clara had seen too much, lost too much, and spent Sarah's whole childhood teaching her to keep her head down. Bikers meant danger. Leather jackets meant gangs. And gangs meant you walked away fast before you became collateral damage. But the oath was louder. "I solemnly pledge myself before God and in the presence of this assembly to pass my life in purity and to practice my profession faithfully." Sarah dropped her bag, tore a sleeve from her uniform, yanked her belt free, and improvised a tourniquet with the precision of someone who had trained for chaos. Her hands moved on instinct, wrap, cinch, twist, tighten. The leather bit into his thigh just above the wound and the bleeding slowed, then stopped. She barked orders to stunned bystanders. "You call 911 again and tell them arterial bleed, code red. You get me something clean, a shirt, a towel, anything." She stabilized his head, checking his airway, his pulse. Thready but there. His skin was cold, clammy grey. Shock was setting in. "Stay with me," she whispered, her hands pressing against his chest. "Come on, stay with me." His eyes fluttered open for just a moment, pale blue, unfocused, but alive. Then they closed again. She worked with a desperation that was half skill, half faith. She didn't have her kit, didn't have her equipment, didn't have backup, but she had her training and her will, and she poured both into this stranger on the ground. Her knees scraped against the concrete. Her uniform was ruined, soaked through with blood that wasn't hers. She didn't care. By the time the sirens screamed down the street, she was drenched in his blood, but he was still alive. The paramedics took over. Efficient and quick, loading him onto a gurney and into the ambulance. One of them, an older man with kind eyes, squeezed her shoulder. "You saved his life," he said. "That tourniquet bought him the time he needed." She didn't wait for thanks, she didn't even ask his name. She just picked up her ruined coat, her hands still shaking, and kept walking to the hospital, straight into her own disaster. Dr. Reynolds was waiting in the hallway outside the nurse's station, his arms crossed, his face carved from stone. Sarah, late, bloodstained, trembling, tried to explain. The words tumbled out in a rush, the accident, the bleeding, the life she'd just saved. But he didn't hear the life she had saved. He only saw minutes stolen from his schedule. 17 minutes late, Nurse Cameron, he said, his voice cold enough to freeze water. 17. Do you know how many patients could have been seen in 17 minutes? Do you know how many protocols you've violated by showing up looking like you just walked out of a slasher film? Dr. Reynolds, I don't care, he cut her off with a wave of his hand. I've warned you, I've documented your behavioral issues, your excessive emotionality, your inability to prioritize hospital policy, and now this. I saved a man's life. You abandoned your post. With ice in his voice, he fired her on the spot. Clean out your locker. Security will escort you out. You're done here. The hallway spun. Sarah felt the floor drop out from under her. You can't. I just did. Leave, now. She wanted to scream. She wanted to cry. She wanted to tell him exactly what kind of monster he was, but her voice wouldn't come. So she walked, numb and hollow, to the locker room. She emptied her locker into a plastic bag, an extra pair of scrubs, a stethoscope her mother had given her, a photo of the two of them at her graduation. Security didn't even look at her as they walked her to the exit. And just like that, it was over. 6 years of school. 2 years of working herself to the bone. All of it gone because she'd chosen to save a life instead of a schedule. The man she had saved, known in the Brotherhood as Ghost, lay in St. Jude's ICU that same night. The surgery had been long and brutal, but he'd pulled through. Ghost wasn't just another biker, he was the national treasure of the Iron Horse Brotherhood, an elder with decades of respect and power. He'd been with the club since he was 19, had buried brothers, raised sons, and bled for the patch on his back more times than he could count. When he woke up, groggy and stitched together, the first thing he asked was, who stopped the bleeding? The nurse, a young woman named Tanya who'd worked with Sarah, told him the story. About the girl who'd been late, who'd stopped anyway, who'd ruined her uniform and probably her career to keep a stranger alive. Ghost's jaw tightened. What happened to her? Fired, Dr. Reynolds canned her the second she walked in. Ghost closed his eyes, but his hand was already reaching for the phone on the bedside table. From his hospital bed, he flipped open a battered phone and sent one message to his president, Ragnar. Blood debt, find the nurse, pay the cost, all of it. The next morning was quiet until the ground itself began to shake. Sarah, still in her tiny apartment, hadn't slept. She'd spent the night staring at the ceiling, running through her options. They were grim. She had maybe 2 weeks of rent money left. No job, no references, and a firing on her record that would follow her everywhere. She'd called her mother, but Miss Clara was barely scraping by herself, living on disability checks and prayers. She heard it first as a vibration in the floorboards, a low rumble, deep and rhythmic, like distant thunder that wouldn't stop. Then came the sound, deep, layered, alive. Not one Harley, but hundreds. The windows rattled. Car alarms started going off up and down the block. She rushed to the window. The street below had disappeared beneath chrome and leather. 400 bikers, shoulder to shoulder, engines rumbling low, patches glinting in the sun. The Iron Horse Brotherhood had come in force, chapter presidents, road captains, enforcers, old-timers and prospects, all of them standing in formation like an army. Their bikes stretched around the corner and out of sight. Neighbors peeked through blinds in terrified awe, convinced this was some kind of raid or war about to break out. And then came the knock at Sarah's door. She opened it slowly, her heart hammering. Standing there was Ragnar, immense, weathered, his patched vest zipped tight over a barrel chest. His beard was streaked with grey, his hands scarred, his eyes sharp and calculating. But when he spoke, his voice was gravel but not unkind. "Are you Nurse Cameron, the one who saved my brother?" Sarah nodded, her throat too tight to speak. "Don't be afraid," Ragnar said, and something in his tone made her believe him. "We're not here for trouble, we are here for you." He explained what Ghost had declared, that a blood debt had to be repaid, that the Brotherhood didn't forget loyalty, kindness, or sacrifice, that she had saved one of their own and the club took care of its own. Then Chains, one of the bikers, stepped forward with a sealed envelope. He was younger than Ragnar, built like a truck, with tattoos crawling up his neck and a scar across his eyebrow. But his hands were gentle as he passed the envelope to Sarah. Inside, Sarah found a cashier's check. The memo line read, "Paid in full, $120,000. Her student debt gone in a single breath. She stared at it, sure it was fake, sure this was some kind of mistake or cruel joke, but Ragnar's expression didn't waver. "That's real," he said. "Ghost wanted it done, so it's done." Sarah's knees buckled. She grabbed the doorframe to stay upright. I can't. But Ragnar wasn't finished. "You lost your job for saving a life," he said, "so we'll build you a place where saving lives is the only rule." 2 blocks from St. Jude's, the Brotherhood had already purchased an abandoned warehouse. It had been a meatpacking plant once, then a storage facility, then nothing at all for 5 years. But the bones were good, high ceilings, solid walls, and enough space to build something that mattered. Within hours, bikers who once swung chains were swinging hammers. Plumbers, electricians, welders, and carpenters, all from the club, worked around the clock. They gutted the interior, ripped out the rot, and rebuilt from the ground up. Drywall went up, wiring was run, plumbing was installed. Donations poured in from chapters across the country, exam tables, medical supplies, computers, even a portable X-ray machine from a brother who worked hospital acquisitions. News vans showed up, cameras rolling, reporters shouting questions. But Ragnar only showed them the permits and told them nothing else. Private project, move along. In 3 days, the Cameron Free Clinic stood where a ruin had been, clean, modern, fully stocked with donated equipment. The waiting room had comfortable chairs, magazines, and toys for children. There were 4 exam rooms, a procedure room, a small lab, and an office. The walls were painted a soft blue, calming and professional. And on opening day, Ragnar stood with Sarah on the steps. In front of cameras and neighbors, he handed her the keys. "This city fired her for compassion," he said, his voice carrying over the crowd. "We hired her for life. She is now the director of nursing at this clinic, and this is only the beginning." The cameras went wild. Reporters surged forward, shouting questions. Sarah stood there, tears streaming down her face, unable to speak. This wasn't real. It couldn't be real. Then came the final gift. Ragnar pulled another envelope from his vest. Inside was an acceptance letter and a scholarship check for $400,000, covering her full ride to Harvard University's nurse practitioner program. Ghost had made calls, the Brotherhood had made donations, and Harvard had made an offer. "Go get your degree," Ragnar told her, his voice softer now, almost fatherly. "When you graduate, come back and run this place like the hero you already are." Tears blurred Sarah's eyes as the bikers mounted their iron horses once more. Ghost, healed enough to ride, sat tall among them, his hand raised in a silent salute. Engines thundered, then softened as they rolled away, leaving Sarah with a clinic, a future, and a story no one would believe if it hadn't been carved in steel before their eyes. A week later, justice came full circle. Dr. Reynolds was stripped of his license under the weight of an investigation sparked by the Brotherhood's anonymous tip line. Turns out, Sarah hadn't been the only nurse he'd abused. There were dozens of complaints, buried under bureaucracy and intimidation. But when the Brotherhood's lawyers got involved, everything came to light. St. Jude's begged Sarah to return, offering her a promotion, a raise, anything she wanted. She refused. She was already preparing for Harvard. And in the quiet of her new clinic, she finally understood. Justice doesn't always come in white coats or polished shoes. Sometimes it comes on roaring motorcycles, carried by men in black leather who believe a debt of honor must be repaid, not once but 1,000 times over. Sarah had saved a life that day on Walker Street. What she didn't know was that in doing so, she had saved her own.